Okay, so I did my project on increasing engagement in school age children with ASD in speech and language sessions in school based settings. So, in completing the transition back to in person after such a prolonged period of teletherapy due to the pandemic, school based clinicians are experiencing increased difficulty to consistently engage school age students with ASD in person instructional sessions. So, my question was well, how can I improve clinician attainment and maintenance of student engagement in person sessions to ultimately maximize the students' benefit from those speech and language sessions and to improve the efficacy of those sessions? So, the literature tells us that kids with ASD do often show difficulty participating in instructional activities and other daily tasks in school based settings. And especially, these challenges arise when they're asked to engage in specific stimuli or tasks, since kids with ASD, according to the literature, display increased distractibility. Engagement has been deemed a critical component in two main areas of need for kids with ASD: learning and development. And additionally, engagement has been connected to developmental abilities and it's been indicative of both existing and future academic and language abilities. The literature also tells us that this is a problem. Kids with ASD do often exhibit struggles with engagement in instructional settings specifically. They spend more time unengaged and less time in levels of active or high engagement, and they also have increased difficulty transitioning that engagement between different people and tasks when compared to their peers with and without disabilities. So this is important because the links between engagement and development and learning have indicated that lower engagement levels do adversely impact abilities by reducing the number of learning opportunities available for kids with ASD. And since kids with ASD do struggle with engagement, and we know that's a very important element for many developmental elements, improving engagement in instructional settings is essential to maximize the outcomes and learning opportunities for kids with ASD. And it's important because this is relevant now. We just transitioned back from teletherapy to in person, and we're mainly in that format now. And so it is vital that professionals servicing these students have knowledge on engagement and the strategies used to facilitate engagement in kids with ASD. So my proposed solution was implementation of an engagement strategies for children with ASD training program for school-based clinicians, ESCA. It'll consist of evidence-based practices of engagement strategies that research has found to facilitate engagement in school-age kids with ASD. It'll include descriptions of those practices and those strategies and school-based application examples. So the goals of ESCA were to improve the knowledge and skill base of school-based clinicians on engagement practices with school-age kids with ASD, and to increase the engagement levels of school-age kids with ASD in instructional settings. So to determine the efficacy of ESCA, I measured the school-based clinicians' perception of knowledge and skills on engagement practices for school-age kids with ASD and those school-age kids with ASD's engagement levels in those speech and language sessions. So, to measure the school based clinicians' perception of their knowledge and skills on engagement practices for kids with ASD, I administered through a Google form electronically a knowledge and skills 5 point rating scale in which the school based clinicians rated their own perception of both their knowledge on engagement strategies and skills on engagement strategies, all for kids with ASD. This was done pre-intervention to establish a baseline and then post to measure any changes in the SLP's perceptions of their knowledge and skill base with engagement practices for kids with ASD after implementation of ESCA. So, the following statements were rated regarding the SLP's perception of their knowledge on engagement strategies for this population. They rated the existence of two or more engagement practices, their knowledge on the implementation of engagement practices, the rationales of engagement practices, all for kids with ASD. And then to measure their perception of their skills on engagement practices for kids ASD, they answered these items. How would you rate your ability to adequately gain the engagement of, maintain the engagement of, regain the engagement of, implement engagement strategies, and choose engagement strategies to implement based on individual traits and needs, all for kids with ASD? So, after receiving responses from the rating scale survey, the two SLPs on the planning committee calculated separate mean scores for each item on the survey. And this quantitative data provided information on the efficacy of ESCA in increasing the knowledge and skill base of engagement strategies for kids with ASD as perceived by the service providers themselves. Next, we measure the children with ASD's engagement levels in speech and language sessions with in-person session observation with a timer to assess each child's engagement level in intervals of 60 seconds for 10 minutes during those sessions. Each SLP was observed 3 times a week for 4 weeks to total 12 sessions, and the sessions were recorded. Now, all of this was to account for possible data inconsistencies like the SLP, the SLP's mood or fatigue, the child's mood or fatigue, anything like that. Since fatigue and the mood could play a factor in the data. So then from each session, the SLP recorded each minute this clinician spent redirecting the student, and that was counted as any form of like verbal, visual, gestural, or tactile prompting by the clinician to gain the attention of the student or engagement. So then after each session, the following percentage was calculated, a percentage of time spent engaged. So they did the number of minutes the clinician spent redirecting over total minutes observed times 100, and then that gives us a percentage of time disengaged, to which you subtract that from 100 to get percentage of time spent engaged. From this, we calculated a mean percentage of time spent engaged for each student in the sessions. And again, this was done both pre-intervention to establish a baseline engagement level of each student and post with implementation of an engagement strategy learned in ESCA to assess the efficacy of the program and increasing engagement levels in kids with ASD during those sessions. So implementation of the ESCA program, well, it was developed through extensive research where we chose the strategies and practices that were most frequently supported by the research and shown to facilitate engagement with school-age children with ASD specifically and could be applied in instructional settings. And we implemented it in the school that contained the population of school-age kids with ASD receiving speech and language services in school. The planning committee consisted of 2 SLPs who specialized in servicing school-age kids with ASD, 2 special education teachers, 2 OTs, a district representative, and the principal of the school ESCA was implemented in. To gain participation, we sent out an application and a newsletter to multiple school superintendents of districts that contained the population we were looking for, both school-age kids with ASD and those SLPs servicing them. It was funded by the New York City Department of Education, in which the school-based SLPs were able to attend training programs under the New York City DOE's budget for school-based service providers for PDs. So the materials for the engagement strategies in ESCA, such as like sensory balls and seat cushions, were also provided to each SLP who attended the training, and that was included in the cost to attend. So the DOE paid for that. So it was instructed via a PowerPoint presentation presented by the 2 SLPs on the planning committee, and again, it included a description of the engagement strategies that facilitate engagement in school-age kids with ASD, the research that supported these practices, and application descriptions and examples in a speech and language session in a school setting. It spanned over 1 full school day and was divided into 2 parts separated by a lunch break. Part 1 included the introduction, description, and school-based application instruction and examples of the engagement strategies. And I'm not going to read them all for time purposes, but here are some of the strategies and practices that were included in the ESCA program. And Part 1 also included video examples of the SLP presenters using each of those strategies in real-life sessions. Part 2 consisted of reviewing the school-based application examples and practicing usage of those presented strategies through mock sessions with each other monitored by the SLP presenters on the planning committee. And it concluded with a non-graded 10-question application quiz in which they were given scenarios in which kids with ASD were experiencing engagement challenges in the sessions, and based on the information learned in the ESCA and the information in the scenario about the child, their behaviors, the SLPs chose an engagement strategy to implement and explained why, and this led to a discussion and a review. So the results of the perceptual rating scale go as follows. These were the items where they rated their perception of their knowledge on engagement strategies with kids with ASD. And as you can see, the mean score for all 3 separate items did go up. The same thing for the rating scores of their perceptions of their skills on engagement strategies for each item, 1 through 5. You can see mean score pre-intervention to post all have increased. Then for student engagement levels, all students presented with an increase in the mean percentage of time that was spent engaged in those speech and language therapy sessions, as you can see. SLP 1, student 1, pre-intervention post, 40 to 80. Student 2, pre to post, 20 to 50, and so on. So to analyze the data of the perceptual rating scores, I used a paired t-test to assess the statistical difference in the mean scores of the perceptual rating scales for both the knowledge and skills of engagement strategies for school-age kids with ASD from pre to post-intervention. The results of the paired t-test for their knowledge on engagement practices for school-age kids with ASD yielded a p-value of 0.0098, which is considered to be very statistically significant. So we know that that difference between pre to post is very statistically significant. And the same goes for their perceptions of their skills with engagement practices for school-age kids with ASD, p-value of 0.0019, which states that the difference in results between pre and post intervention is very statistically significant as well. So these results suggest increased knowledge and skills associated with engagement strategies with school-age kids with ASD, resulting from ESCA as perceived by the service providers, the SLPs themselves. To analyze the data for the student engagement levels, we also use a pair t-test to assess the statistical difference in the mean percentages of time spent engaged of each set of students based on the servicing SLP, both pre and post intervention. And these results yielded a p-value of 0.0099, which again states that the difference in results between pre and post intervention is considered to be very statistically significant. So again, these results suggest increased engagement levels of school-age kids with ASD in speech and language sessions through SLP's use of engagement practices learned from implementation of the ESCA program. And here's the table for the pair t-test. And so to evaluate my project, the analysis of the findings do demonstrate that implementation of the ESCA program did meet its intended goals. There were statistically significant increases in all items regarding the SLP's perception of both their knowledge and skill base on engagement strategies for school-age kids with ASD from pre to post intervention. There was also a statistically significant increase in the average time each student spent engaged during the speech and language sessions. Sessions from pre to post intervention, also suggesting increased engagement levels resulting from implementation of ESCA. It is sustainable and continuous. It could be utilized for future SLPs servicing this population or servicing kids in a school-based setting. It is found that the increased knowledge, skill base, and engagement levels resulting from this program diminish over time. This is something that could be implemented triennially or something like that. And if this were to be reduplicated, it would just further confirm the credibility of the findings. It would just be done, I would use the same procedure, but in a different school and with a different SLP and student participants.